means. So hopefully not. But yeah,
I don't know.
yep,
We're,
I don't either.
we're up in five, four. Hmm. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Yes, a giddy Santita. Yes, I'm coming to you very, very late. But, I've had to come and help uh, really just deal with my health and just trying to make sure my whole family's all right. We've been working very hard this week, and I've been with my AM 950 Radio family, believe it or not, up here in Rochester, Minnesota, and so at the Mayo Clinic. But hey, everybody, we're doing well. We're doing very, very well, and thank you for your love and your prayers. Just getting some tune-ups. How about that? So, speaking of tune-ups, boy, some people have been on the come up. Let's talk with Dr. Maxwell, brilliant economist, my dear, 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 beloved friend of more. It's been more than a decade, Dr.
Yeah,
Wolf.
yeah. More than
Oh
a
my,
decade and a half, I think.
oh my gosh.
Yep.
Woo! And
Yeah, yeah.
and whenever there is something of consequence that happens in this economy, he's among the one or two people in the world that my father, my brothers, who I want to talk to, like, what did we just see, or where do you see this going? So brilliant, and really has such, I think, an aspirational as well as a pragmatic approach. And I wanted to talk with him and talk to you about something that he pointed out some time ago, and really with greater urgency over the past year. Just where China fits in the global economy. Americans have been raised on the mythology. Well, it was true in the post World War II era, and really in the industrialized revolution of the world, that we emerged into being number one. We had the grace of two oceans buffering us from east to west, west to east, and we really controlled the hemisphere and then the world. And many Americans are under the impression that that is still so. So, as these tariffs have been imposed and pulled and reimposed, and as China has taken the biggest hit, if you read what leaders from China have been saying, they have said, we've lasted 5,000 years. We were here before you, America, and we will be here after you. They've been very aggressive in their language. Um, and they have said, we don't need the American economy. They're really, they have solid relationships throughout Africa, throughout the global South. They're brokering different deals with European nations, Central America, South America. I don't think we really know, Americans really know, just how wide and deep their influence is economically. And they have a new model. It's a utilitarian model. They are meeting with people, working with people, and striking up business relationships with people. It's a whole new world, a different approach. And I wanted to talk with you, Dr. Max Wolf, about it because many Americans are under the impression that President Trump can bring the president of China to heel and the Chinese people to heel. And we're going to make them do something. And I said, oh, how misguided. I don't think we really know just how big China is and how they continue to grow. And who is really number one, Dr. Wolf?
Yeah, it's not a bipolar world either. There's lots of players. And I think what's hard for folks, and every group of folks who've gone through this, and every empire goes through this at some point, um, we're used to passing people, and we're passing people again, but on the way down. And
Mm.
I think people know it, around the world. Americans sense it. But life is like this, right? There's many moments in a person's life, in a nation's life, in a group or organization's life, where they have to decide to be strong or to look strong, because you can't always do both. We've unfortunately and consistently kind of chose look strong, and that way we're very much like Russia, right? Trying to look strong more than trying to be strong. And I think in many different ways, people have, and that's okay. It's a great big world. Again, we're 4.5% of the world's population and about 18% of its GDP. So still punch above our weight, but not the kind of global control. And then the other thing is, if you tear down a society's structure, scaffolding, and you exacerbate its fissures and crevices and cracks, you get weak fast. And so, we've probably achieved what would have been 12 to 15 years of decline in 45 days, 70 days here, right? So this is kind of wild. So this is unusual by any stretch, I think. The other thing I tell you is every supremacy has a mythology, because every supremacy is false.
Mm.
And so it needs a creation myth, it needs a divine providence myth, and it needs an immortality myth, right? And so it isn't just this complex weave of nations and all these crazy developments and the clash of titans that were our competitors going into the Second World War that left us standing while others were crawling, sort of left us on top of the heap. A lot of hard work, a lot of great decisions helped get us there and keep us there for a while. But that seems to be behind us. And I think most of the world takes for granted that, and you can date these things and fight about when they're dated, and people will. But maybe 1 week ago today ish, about last Wednesday, it became clear to observers that the United States was not the top economy in the world. Sort of, we recklessly and with somewhat poor planning and terrible execution overplayed our hand.
Well, hold on.
Right?
Stay right there.
Mhm.
Because you said something really profound that most Americans, I do not think, have grasped. You said that the United States economy is not the number one economy in the world. Please explain.
Yeah, so I think there's a quandary. I think Americans voted for the people historically who tell them they're number one because it feels good to all people from all over the world. But they didn't vote for the people who would make them number one. And so they're not number one, but they want to be told they're number one. That's always a toxic swill when you get to that moment. But I think that threatening people makes you feel powerful, might make you look powerful, but it doesn't make you powerful because it creates a coalition of opposition and an anemic support group, right? It's that person who's always bossing everyone in their life around, right? The people who will stay around for that are less and less impressive and fewer in number. So they kind of always look like they're in charge, but then the stuff they're calling for doesn't happen, right? So we've all seen this. We either know someone like this or we are the person in our group like this. Hopefully, just know them, survive them, but who knows? Um, and so we sort of made that decision. The analogy that I've gotten in a bit of trouble for, but I think it's still accurate. So guess I'll get in trouble for it again. That one is just that I think we're an aging gangster America in a bad neighborhood. And we've got a big limp now, and we're telling ourselves it's a saunter, and everybody else knows it's the hip. And that's kind of a weird situation to be in. And I think people don't have the stomach, a lot of them, to do the work. They could, they just need more inspiration and leadership, but they don't have that inspiration and leadership right now. So they don't have the sort of, we're not at the national moment by mood or disposition to fight to be number one again, which we can do. It's obviously something you can do. But we want to pronounce it, and we want to make other people say it, as though our limp will go away if people say we walk really well, as though we'll be, 6'3" and 230 pounds and 78 years old, right? The world's, oldest middle linebacker in the NFL. Because no one's ever played into their 70s before, till now.
I mean, but what?
Even the kickers, by the way, don't play into their 70s.
You are so wrong for that. But give
No, they have
them
a
some
longer
depth.
career. No,
Yes,
very talented folks, but you have a longer career.
you're right. Well, what happened? I mean, what happened last week?
Yeah.
Was
So
it?
what happened last
I mean,
week
did
is
the
that we just,
reality change or did the perception change? What happened last week?
I think it might depend on different folks had, some more on the reality side, some more on the perception side. But basically, the United States has been setting up a pretty poorly planned out trade war with all its major trading partners simultaneously. I think we're also beginning to realize why no one has done that before for a long time. Yeah. So this is the guy outside the bar who's, in good shape and fairly decent size, but he's decided to fight all the bouncers at the club and all the cops who showed up at the scene. And if you've seen that on a night out in the town, this is not usually a tale of triumph and dominance. This usually ends fairly poorly. So we had this sort of idea of having a fight with the number one and number two global economy, probably the China and the European Union combined, and with all of our major trading partners. And then we got sort of topped out and decided to do all these tariffs on everyone. Then we told our public that other people would pay the tariffs, not them. So it sort of was a, yeah, it was a real top out. It was that guy out there who's telling everyone he's not drunk while he's falling on the hood of the car and saying that, why won't the entire city police force and all the bouncers and all the neighboring clubs have the temerity to fight him? And then somebody does, and the story ends not as planned. Right. So yeah, I mean, we had that moment. And part of the way we had that moment is when you owe the rest of the world trillions of dollars and you need them to loan the money for tomorrow, and when your investors know that they're part of a global economy, that there aren't really national economies, there's a global economy,
Mm.
they fight back. And the form that took was that the treasuries, the IOUs of the central government, started to sort of swoon. And basically, people said, hey, you want to tell everyone you buy a lot more stuff than you sell to them. That's half the equation. That's how we teach it in economics, too. The other half is they loan you all the money you need to live so that you can buy their stuff. They don't loan you the money out of the kindness of their heart. They loan you the money to buy their stuff. So if you decide one fine afternoon you're not going to buy their stuff and you're going to beat them up, they're going to decide the next fine morning not to loan you the money to do it. And everything kind of locks up.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of what happened, right? And it was fast and it was swift. So it was 2 days into the sort of tariff regime, and you started seeing tariffs be suspended and rolled back, and exemptions being made as the stock market, which it also did, 1 week later, Wednesday, a week from that, on new trade regs, really began into a tailspin. And the truth is, if we decouple and tear down the global economy, we are the globe's firefighter, which we're angry and complaining about, turned globe arsonist. And so all of our businesses and others face a smaller, harder world where there'll be fewer clients and less opportunities and less money to be made. And we will once again find out that hurting other people isn't helping yourself. True with our immigration policy, true with our social welfare policy, true with our policy with neighbors, but that, it's not the nicest saying, but I guess, my family, bunch of Germans, they're not always the most cheerful people. They would like this. My grandparents were fond of the saying that every morgue in every town is full of men the world could not live without, and yet it does. Right. So it's just sort of an idea of place yourself in your, as a mere mortal and your global importance in the same exalted permanence that every other person who died had thought of themselves as well. Right? Everyone who died and everyone who failed had a wish that things would turn out differently. And that's part of the texture of life, but it's a good reminder that dreams are not destinies.
Mm. When were we? Did the Were we number one before last Wednesday?
Depends on
Or
what, not for things like infant mortality or social equity, uh, you know, maternal health, childcare. There were areas that are marginal like that, like children, health,
Mhm.
public infrastructure that we were
There was.
proud to be substantially laggard in across the whole arc of our story, much of it anyway. But I mean, again, these things are hard to say, and on a trade weighted GDP basis, probably not. But we made a bold over the top play that we could control the global economy. And I think we can agree that it was a bold display of descending the stairway very rapidly on your chin.
Mm. So
And
that
I
was the
think,
play.
yeah,
They were trying to control the global economy.
think they were trying to sort of bluster their way, right, to getting what they want. I mean, I think this is something we've seen from this administration in its 2016 to 2020 run, and then again on the campaign trail, and then again, and they've had some success with it, to be fair to them. But this wasn't the success. And unfortunately, this was kind of for the marbles, right? So if you constantly double down and bluster, eventually people realize that you have a two, a three, a five, and a seven in that deck, and that you might not be pulling all the chips off the table. And so we doubled down with a weak hand, and it basically got called, right? And more than any other single party, it got called by what has been a generally diplomatic China in terms of it's been stepping up, but they really kind of stepped up. They kind of said now, right?
Yeah, I mean, and so I mean, I'm trying to figure out how it is that America would play this game with China when we owe them so much money.
We owe a lot of money to the Europeans too, and the Japanese. We've played it with them. So that might be where we got the idea. And I mean, look, when you have a weak hand, you bluff. So the bigger story for America is what happened to our hand? What is happening to our hand? Because we're still a fortunate neighbor, still blessed with lots of resources, still have a great labor force, still have cutting edge technologies. We're not a basket case by any stretch of the imagination. But we're a country that spent a lot of time and money building a global economy with us at the top of it. And then we just went into a wild rage spiral and started tearing down the architecture that supports this country, as it has been. Now, I understand there's other ideas of what it could be, more kind of if we want to roll back the New Deal and want to roll back the Great Society, that can't be done without massive destruction. But again, I'm overly fond of this analogy. If there's 52 cards in the deck of cards, and you're the top card and you shuffle the deck, there's a 51 and 52 chance that you fall through the deck of cards. And we did, and we did. And we kind of have been for a while, but we did, and I think you saw this play out. Americans didn't like the idea of a sort of less aggressive posture from the Biden administration, right? Um, or at least what they perceived as less aggressive posture. And so part of what maybe they voted for was a more aggressive posture. And if you didn't do the hard work and the slow, painful effort to figure out how to be more effective in the world, you just sort of bluffed it. Yeah, you know, normally people are crushed by their successes.
Hmm.
So if you do something and you get away with it too long, you do it when you can't get away with it, and that's your sort of comeuppance, right? That's the flight of Icarus.
Well, is that what we're? Are we on that trajectory now? Have we flown too close to the sun?
We're on the way down. We're on
Oh,
the Gravity Express, I think, right now. I mean, like
our our
you can,
wings our wings are melting. They're melting.
yeah. Are they partially melted? Right
Wow.
now, I think that people have a tendency to think that like the next generation will just be China as America or something. That China is a very different country with a very different history, different set of aspirations. They will not just be the America. And the United States won't necessarily be a subject nation. That's up to us and what we do for the next bunch of years. But we just won't be able to aggressively bluff and bluster everyone down because they all need us and we don't need them. Because they do need us, but less than we think. And we do need them and more than we think.
Hmm.
And I guess I say this fairly frequently too, but it doesn't seem to ever really stick. An economy is a system of interdependences, like a society. We rely on each other. We are only as good and as strong as those around us. However uncomfortable that makes us feel, however at odds that can be with certain ideas of being a leader or being a man or being in charge, you are only as good as the soldier in front of you and the soldier behind you and the person who sewed your uniform and the person who made your guns and the person who filled your stomach and the person who cares for the fallen and the person who raised those soldiers, right? I mean, there's no other way. It's a nice fantasy and it's fine to escape into that realm, but in a world where no one raises their own food, or nearly no one makes their own clothes, no one cuts their own hair, right? No, very few people here are even as in as even as much alone in the world as they might have been 2 generations, 3 generations ago. It's a highly interdependent world, right?
Hmm.
We have an industry that tells us our sexual fantasies, and we all think they're unique. We don't even do that ourselves anymore. So it's a good sign of interdependence. Might be an awkward one to mention, but it is true. So the average American gets up in the morning, sleeping on sheets, none of which were made in the United States, in clothes, none of which were made in the United States, might be using electricity into the room, not generated in the United States, uses an appliance when they first wake up of some type that was not made in the United States, goes downstairs and takes out a cup that was not made in the United States, brews a cup of coffee that was not made in the United States, adds some sugar that was not made in the United States, sits on a chair that was not made in the United States, gets on their phone, which was not made in the United States, and hits a bunch of apps which may or may not have been done outside the US. And then either way, they're going to then kind of have a day that looks like that. So my old joke, which was sometimes considered not in the best of taste, was how close you are to the rest of the world. It's covering your junk right now because no one's underpants were made in this country for a long time. And if yours were, that's something I'd keep to myself because they're 25 years old and that's not always a good look.
Where are we? So where are we? And I mean, what is going to happen with these tariffs?
And so, look, I
What's
want to be
what?
clear.
What's
This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Okay.
the
If we want to
tariffs?
manufacture, well, tariffs, depending on how they're done, they don't usually work. And it's
Okay.
all like you can't spend 25, actually 50 years forcing open global trade and then close the door behind you. This is a long story. We've seen it a lot of times, right? So everyone likes free trade when they're the best at things, and no one likes free trade when they're not. It's a little bit like, and this is an experience in my everyday life, so I'm closer to it. It's a little bit like playing a board game with a 6-year-old, right? Like you're never going to win. There's always going to be a rule. There's always going to be something, and there's going to be some reason that, like, that this is the rule or that's the rule. And at some point, you realize the rule they're attempting to put in place is that they win. And I understand the appeal of that rule that I win or it's cheating. The problem with that is that that is not a good way to teach someone how the world works. And to me, that's a sort of unfortunately repeated trope here. It's like, oh, if a person of color or a woman or a person who doesn't look like me won, they cheated me. If another country makes a product that sells better, they cheated us, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that you're much better off saying, I'm not good at everything. What can I learn from my failures? How do I stay, humble? And how do I get better at the stuff I care about? The problem with that is it requires an honest conversation about what you care about. And we've been a little bit unwilling to do that as a country. I think that made it harder. And then, yeah, I mean, I think pronouncements are easy. Destruction is pretty easy, but collaboration and agreement and rebuilding and building are hard, right? Especially in a Congress that's had a hard time coming to agreements for more than a few years.
They're split in two. I mean,
Yeah,
and what is there? What what were they? I mean, because it's not just Trump.
no, of course not.
It's a council, but a lot of people, I think I grew up in Chicago, and Mayor Richard J. Daley um, said one of the first rules, one of the early rules of power, is that you don't call the name of your opponent, or let alone your enemy. So he's not my enemy, but we certainly are opponents. And so calling his name all the time to me is kind
Silly.
is silly. Not to mention the fact that the presidency does not work that way. It you have
Wasn't supposed to,
it,
anyway.
no, it's not supposed to, but it certainly in his case it does not. Um, he is
No.
speaking for bankers and on Wall Street and throughout the world, and yada 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 yada, all of that. My question is now, I mean, has he put us in a hole? And if he has, even if he hasn't, were we in a hole before? And has
Yes.
the hole gotten deeper?
I mean, look, I think that if you make someone the devil, you have to fight a devil, which is never a great idea.
Mm.
Okay. So, and the structural problems in the American economy long predate the first Trump administration, let alone second. That being said, there's a certain amount of recklessness and trampling the checks and balances and using the usual experts here that has really created distress and instability. And the last thing I'll tell you is there are basic rules we know pretty well. So, in lack of visibility, okay, fear and lack of certainty, fear and lack of process are worse than bad news for financial markets and business people. They're better off with a tough future that they know and can plan around than with chaos, right? And so one of the ironies of the Trump administration is lots of people are excited about Trump administration for deregulation and tax cuts, which I understand, but they don't understand the biggest tax out there is chaos. No one is prosperous in chaos, right? Because they don't know the rules. And every day we wake up and we don't know if the market's going up 5% or down 5%. We don't know exactly what major change in 50-year policy is going to be announced, and then what'll be announced about rollbacks or suspensions or 90-day windows the next day. So it is an environment that's negative, that's fearful, but that's defined by chaos. And this is kind of an interesting one because the same party has the House, the Senate, right? And the White House and the Supreme Court. And so the chaos is their function. It's not so much their opposition, which just sits there mumbling or quietly talking or trying some grandstands to sort of slow things down. But this is an internal chaos. This is not a chaos foisted on us by the outside world. But we are foisting our chaos on the outside world. And that's part of what's building a coalition of opposition. And we did a bit of this before, so it's not none of this is new. But so yeah, I mean, and the other thing is if you spend 5, 6, 7 years bloviating about how you're the best, you're the best, you're the best, and everyone will be brought to heel, the smarter people are quiet and they plan.
Hmm.
They plan for the fight. The loud guys, maybe they don't because they love the pronouncements. But the other side, they work on it, right? And they sort of get serious about it. And they have their own problems, their own fissures, and their own challenges. We're not the only imperfect guest at the dinner party, but yeah, I think it's rough. I think it's a rough moment, and I think what Americans don't realize, but I guess they will, or they're beginning to the hard way, is
Oh.
there are basically a few props that make Americans, however prosperous we are, much less than we think, by the way, by global standards. But that notwithstanding, that's cheap labor of immigrants, it's cheap goods imported from the rest of the world, and it's government assistance, and it's cheap interest rates. And in 3 months, we have torn them all down. And so you're starting to see 3 months look like a 10-year slide potentially here. So, in terms of health and human services, in terms of social safety net, in terms of job training, in terms of all kinds of things, right? We're trying to change the story. Let me give you an example. If you feel like your group is underrepresented, you can try to invest in their ability to do better, or you can erase the contributions of other people. Erase the contributions of other people moves really fast, might give you a sugar high, but it actually doesn't make your people any more successful. Right. And so that's one of the odd things. Like there's no amount of the contributions of women in an institution that you can erase that helps today's men or women or children. Right. We've seen this before.
Yeah.
Right. And we saw those contributions we do recognize for people of color, marginalized communities, women, other groups. We saw those kind of a late recognition. And again, I don't think we've been so charitable. I don't know where that idea comes from. I think we figured out that that was overdue. And so
But
we sort of recognized it. And then unrecognizing it, it's not going to change your global preparedness.
well, with global preparedness, what should we be prepared for?
I'll give you a good example. If you if you reduce the ability to be economically and politically viable of half your population because they're women, you will simply lose a lot of struggles. Full stop, the end. Because you're going to come in there with one arm and some of your oppositions are going to decide to use both arms, and that turns out to be a pretty good idea, both arms. It's a pretty robust strategy. Okay, if 40% of your country's younger people are from diverse backgrounds and you kind of pretend they don't exist and deny them opportunity, you're weaker in the struggle, because also the time and money you spend like kind of keeping people down is time and money you don't spend building your country up, right? Because it isn't as though there's sort of different Americas. There's one America,
Mm.
and this being disunity is not usually a plus, right? So it's not usually a plus. And if you look at young people, if you think young people are the future, and that's sort of a silly bromide because who else would be? Then you don't want to particularly tax the young, right? I
Okay.
mean, I'll give you another argument. You can make the argument that more than half the economic growth in the United States in the last 40 years has been women entering the workforce and counting their labor from houses where their labors were mostly not counted. Right, the old story that if you pay someone to make your bed, it's an economic activity. If you do it yourself, it's not. If you pay someone to make your dinner, it's an economic activity. If you do it yourself, it doesn't really get counted. If you do your own laundry, it's doesn't really get counted. If you pay someone else to do your laundry, it gets counted. So things are moving from the uncounted into the counted, right? But I mean, and again, this is not to be a jerk, and I went to graduate school for statistics as one of the kind of expressions of misguidedness in my youth. But we have a big debate here that's like statistics 100, which is we don't know as much of what's changed as we know of what we pay attention to, which shifts. So you can't do this. It's the same way that like a lot of the change in autism in the United States is probably that we really measure it more prominently, more deeply than we did before. So we don't know if how much of the increase in autism in the country is new and better ways of measuring things on a spectrum, and how much is increases in autism. We know there's an increase in autism, but we don't know how much of it is increase in counting, right? We know this about sexual assault. When you take sexual assault seriously, you suddenly have lots of numbers of sexual assault. When you don't, you don't. But again, you're looking at two different things. You're looking at the occurrence of an event, and you're looking at the measurement of that event.
How well? Jamie Dimon keeps saying that got to be careful. We don't want to be in a recession. Are we already there?
Probably. I mean, look, the old joke is that it's a recession when your neighbor loses their job, and it's a depression when you lose your job. So the
Yes.
public perception of these things and the statistical economic measurements are not always in lockstep. So normally there's something at the National Bureau of Economic Research. It's actually a team of people called the Business Cycle Dating Committee, and they're actually officially charged with telling us, looking back basis, when we entered a recession and when we exit a recession. That is important, but it's mostly the stuff and fascination of oddballs like me who become economists. For the general public, it's like, hey, is unemployment going up? Is it harder to get a job? Is there too much a month at the end of the money? How many nights do I wake up from 3 to 4 in the morning worried about rents and mortgages and car payments and stuff, right? That's probably the lived version of it. A smarter guy than me once told us in the statistics class, always remember that statistics is history with the tears wiped dry. It can be a bit cold. And so the human experience of these things can be a little bit richer, a little bit more kind of colorful and dramatic. Yeah, I think we're either in or near a significant recession. And one of the official groups that does that is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, Georgia. And therefore, they believe we are in a recession, a somewhat meaningful recession already. Right.
Somewhat
And obviously,
meaningful. Somewhat
yeah,
meaningful. What does that mean?
like 4%, 3.5 to 4% decrease in economic activity on the quarter. And that's pretty meaningful. I mean,
Okay.
I think the consensus of people that I would speak to, professional economists, strategists, is that we are heading into probably the worst recession, at least since 2008. Not the same, it won't have the same expression, but yeah, most people think it'll be pretty meaningful. And again, we don't have much clarity here because we have very dramatic sweeping policies being suggested. Not all of them seem like they've been worked out and thought through completely. And then we have a somewhat mercurial kind of pattern here where very broad announcements are made, deep economic trauma results, and then it's partially retracted quickly and then partially brought back and then partially retracted. So it is, it is a bit hard to forecast this.
Mhm.
And I would just say that with all things like this, because we don't know where we're going, it's not clear if anyone does, but we know it's radical and different and somewhat emotional and not all that well thought out. If you think you really know how to forecast this, You either have saw some kind of game plan that no one else has seen, or more likely you've drastically overestimated your forecasting ability.
We talked with economist Dr. Max Wolf about what's going on with the tariffs and the economy. Many of us, Dr. Wolf, are scared to death. We've
Yeah,
seen our 401ks be worth far, I mean, they just lost
the
so much money.
201k. Yeah, it's a
Oh,
big
the
joke in there.
201k.
Yeah.
And the money is gone. Most people I know say we're not going to get it back. We know that. Um,
Markets can be resilient, but it depends on your time frame too. Yeah.
well, markets, you're right. Markets can be resilient. Will our market be resilient? Are we resilient?
So the good news and the bad news is that depends on the decisions we make and the efforts we make going forward, right? The future is not, yours by entitlement or yours by destiny. The future is what people make it, right? And the economy is a system of interdependence. It's a bunch of interactions between people and businesses and the government and other governments. And it's a dance, right? It's a dance with 8 billion dancers across 190 countries. So the idea that someone's going to control it or even understand it, especially if it's not their specialty and their obsession, is ludicrous. It's ludicrous, right? And so, yeah, it's exciting that it's like that, right? But the thing I used to tell my students, because I taught graduate students in economics for many of the last 15 years, New York City rush hour is a calmer, more forecastable, streamlined event than the global economy by a wide margin. And if you've waded into those throngs of people at rush hour in this city, it could be take on its own logic or
Brutal?
illogic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quick and short tempered and mercurial, and it can change quickly. Um, and I don't dislike this city, it's where I'm from, but New York City is never more than 20 minutes away from chaos, right? So, so that the leash isn't that long, right? And I know there are other cities like this too, probably. But and global economy is far more. I can tell you that if we stay on the path we're on, we're going to go into a recession with the worst trade relations, the most tattered social safety net, and the most divided public we've seen at least probably in the last 100 years or so. And I think we'll see a world of real want that we haven't seen as much in the US, real diminishment of US global power, both soft and hard power. And the last piece that makes me nervous as an economist is the world doesn't wear Levi's, especially in 90-degree tropical heat, or drink Coca Cola because they're so dang good. I mean, they might be great, but they're doing it because brand America has been a great brand in the world. It's been youth and exciting and newness and opportunity. And that is not the brand now. The brand is sort of bullying and mercurial and trying to force the hands of the clock backward. And those things don't sell product in this world. And even if ours isn't, even if we sort of really maim our own future here, the future of the world will still be female, and the future of the world will still be in the southern hemisphere. So we may not be as much a part of that history, but we cannot change it so much. Nor is it clear to me why we would want to. Every study of every psychologist and every group of people and every corporate management specialist tells you get comfortable getting out of your comfort zone or fall behind.
Well,
So my guess is they're not all wrong.
are Americans ready to hear that message?
Probably. Look, I think the average American is overwhelmed and frightened and maybe a bit disillusioned right now. I think people were frightened and angry about a status quo that didn't give them what they wanted and needed. And if that wasn't true, they wouldn't have elected Donald Trump, right? And some of the other folks they've elected. So I think that dissatisfaction was already there. And I think the nice thing about solutions like those that he proposes is of all the things to be up at night worried about, the fact that they'll work is not one of them.
Dr. Max Wolf, when you look at what's going on here, this is a very, very scary time. Very scary time. What do you
Not if
think?
you're in the casket business. Life is always life is always relative to your position.
You almost made me lose myself. You are wrong for that. I mean, do you think?
Tear gas also looks good. Private prisons are booming. There
Do
will
you?
always be opportunities in the rubble.
Well, but that's my question. I mean, with Harvard is standing up, but
Hmm?
so many of these schools are not. And now I don't think Americans really understand how colleges and universities are the economic engines for their immediate, the areas in which they have been situated.
Yeah, but I
And
think part of the reason
okay,
Americans are angry is because they have a struggle. To the extent there is much struggle these days, it's between the past they didn't like and a future they don't want. And it's hard to get people excited and motivated there. If you're looking at a menu and it's sort of like, hey, things that made me really angry that weren't working for me, or things that are scarier and less desirable than that, I don't know where people land, right? So I think it takes a while for people to figure it out. But I think despite what the politicians say and how good that some of them are on any side, it's not a Republican or Democrat thing or a Trump or non-Trump thing. The truth is that most Americans are really afraid. They don't think their kids will have a life as good as theirs. They're worried about getting sick. They're worried about getting old. They're worried about health care and car payments and house payments. And the vast majority of people want to have a decent life. And I don't think, even if they can be temporarily excited about it, I don't think that the average American person wants to get ahead by pulling someone else down. Sure, there's some of that, and there's anger all over the place, and it can take that form. But I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true in the Republican Party. I don't think that's true in the Democratic Party. I don't think that's true on Wall Street, and I don't think that's true on Main Street.
I don't think so either. I mean, so I mean, so how should we? How do we? I mean, just to let's take it out of theory. How are Americans supposed to make it in this moment?
They have to come together. The thing we're least good at is the thing we need to do, right? We have to see some kind of, so as much as there's a sort of critique of empathy, and it can be taken in a bad direction or too far, people have to try to figure out how to get through this together, right? They have to figure out how to help themselves and help each other, because this idea we have, this constant temptation that I'm in it on my own and I only need to worry about me and I'm just going to do this
Mhm.
for me, that's particularly terrible as an idea in tough times. In tough times, when the systems that you rely on and the historical help isn't there, you actually have to build a community. And that would be a beautiful thing that could come out of this, right? Where people will realize, particularly not if they're in some tiny number of elite who can buy their way around some of this stuff. And you can't really buy your way around most of it, even if you're pretty wealthy. Um, yeah, that they'll realize, right? So they're not alone, i.e., we're not alone against the rest of the world. We're not alone against each other. Constantly dividing people is kind of how things
Mhm.
get this bad, which kind of gives you a roadmap back to something better, which is less divided, right? So, in our greatest moments of tribulation, it's often been our divides. And in our greatest successes, it's often been some ability to get over them. Not because we're all the same, not because we all want the same things, not because we're secretly identical, because that's not true, but because we want enough of the same stuff that we can work on that and build something a bit better together, right? But I think we need that social safety net. I think the last piece we haven't talked about, which is an area where I do a lot of concentration, I think is big, is in the midst of all this, we're going to see one of the largest labor market transformations since the Industrial Revolution with AI and humanoid robots and basic organizational things. And so the American public is looking at new technologies, new rules, a new labor market, a new place in the world, a new social safety net, a new social contract. It's a lot of new. It's a lot of new, especially a lot of new delivered that wasn't all that well thought out, that's being fed to people as a return to some halcyon days of tradition.
Aren't they? But what's ahead for America?
I think of a highly disrupted labor market, a declining place in the world, a harder time getting a less sufficient job, and a sort of real question mark. And the real question mark is if we can rebuild some of our social safety net, it doesn't have to be the same. We can learn the lessons of the past, of the inefficiencies, and there was waste and abuse, and you can try to cut that out, and that's important. But we need some social safety net because it's just plain going to be hard. And we sort of need to get over this idea that it's hard for you because you're bad and it's God's punishment or some social Darwinism. We will not survive that delusion. So, it's going to be important for us not to. It's going to be important for us to come together to help people, right? Because
Yeah,
ultimately, the average functional, decent, law abiding citizen is the best asset we have.
that's true.
And
That's
we've lost our way on that completely. We've lost our way on the dignity of work and respecting people who are working for a living. I think that's really important. I think we really fell off on that one. That any man, any woman who gets up and works hard all day, particularly in a job that isn't glamorous and doesn't pay that well, that's national hero, right? That's the sort of major way things move forward. And I think you need a social safety net. I think you need to ask a lot to people, and you need to make sure they don't fall below a minimum. Because when people start to fall below a minimum and everyone gets comfortable with it, you get that casual cultural cruelty, right? And I mean, I'm not saying I'm better than someone else. I step over people in all forms of duress across my day in New York City, like everybody else here. And as a guy who spent a lot of time here for a long time, I can tell you it's rough out there, right? So I think the casual cruelty is the wrong path, and some kind of minimum social guarantees, again, not excessive, not crazy, not so that people don't have motivation, but I think you're going to need that. And I think if you don't get that, you're going to pay more in social unrest and violence than that would cost you, to a much less positive end.
what about people who try to go to school? I mean,
Yeah.
high school, college. What's going to
I mean,
happen?
I never went, but bless them. It's been tough for me as a professor. Yeah, I'm obviously a fan of school on some level. Yeah, but I think school's also a little bit out of touch too. I think, schools have prided themselves on tradition and teaching people, and it's yeoman's work and it's poorly supported and poorly compensated. But kids need to be prepared as much for the constant trauma of change and for a world that looks really different. I'm not sure, for instance, I have a 7.5-year old, and I don't know what college would look like for her. I don't want her to go $250,000 in debt in an effort to compete vigorously with a $30 a month software package.
Oh,
So yeah, I mean there are some real issues, and I think the humanoid robots will come, and that's not necessarily a bad thing again, but it's going to be a different thing, right? And I think the sort of progress in artificial intelligence is going to be big, and I think this what they call the agentic movement, where it's not so much general capability as specific workflows and deliverables that are coming from artificial intelligence systems. Okay, I think we're going to need to think about it. We're going to need to think about it in an age where Chat GPT can probably pass all the state bar exams and all the law school exams for $20 a month,
when you
or
look,
Figure AI, the best of the humanoid robots coming out. And they
well,
can work 20 hours a day. They're $125,000 a year now. I teach one robot one thing. I have one on the assembly line for a year. I buy 5 next year. The first day they come online, they're networked in and they have a year of experience. Right? Like that's pretty, working 20 hours a day in temperatures from 0 to 125 degrees, no days off, no benefits. Yeah,
see,
there's
that's what
things are
I'm.
going to have to change.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I shouldn't even try. Just what these people are thinking by approaching China so aggressively, um, because they've got
Might be
the.
more for domestic political consumption.
Yeah, but it's
I know
costing us with them.
it's costing us with us,
Well, now there's that.
right? It's costing us with us. It's also not viable. So you end up with this weird patchwork of these are the rules, but not for you, and not sometimes, and not for 90 days, and not in this field, and not
Yeah.
in that field. And then a weird patchwork. And then these ideas that we're going to make so much money on those tariffs. I mean, tariff is just a word for a class of taxes. And some fair number of those taxes will be paid by us. And then, look, tariff begins a trade war. Trade wars have lots of weapons: currency manipulation, unfair trade practices, all kinds of other things, right? And when America says they don't want to do things for other people, what they're saying is we don't want to pay to be atop the global heap. So then other people will think, okay, well, then you're not atop the global heap, or then we're going to withdraw something that we do, right?
Yeah.
The best analogy I can give is if you're in a couple and that couple's having difficulty, and one person decides to sort of signal their unhappiness or feel victimized by withdrawing things they used to do around the house. I've never seen that work as a great path back to marital harmony. Like, yeah, we were really struggling until I stopped doing any of the shopping or cleaning, and that brought us back together from the brink to our happy times now. I don't think you'd go to a marriage counselor or read a book about having a better relationship with someone and be like, you know what? Stop doing the nice little things you do to help when times are tough. And by all means, let's agree it's probably the other person's fault. I mean, like, it's a mediocre, right? That's not even a friendly divorce at the end of that advice
No, it's
path,
not.
right?
I'm
Yeah.
reading what leadership from China are saying, and they're, hey, I'm not even mad at them, because if you step to someone a particular way in interpersonal relationships, um, those are those are that's those are game change. This is a game changing moment, and in these last 3 or 4
Not
minutes before we
toothpaste that's
go.
going to go back in the tube. Yeah.
No, it's not. And you've been saying that for a long time. And I wanted you to talk about this because I said, now we're here. Okay, now we're here. What do we do? I mean, are our clothes going to be more expensive?
Yes.
Contact lenses, lipstick, and
I mean, yes.
it seems like we're being broken and other people are being made. Am I wrong?
I mean, I think we have to rewrite. I think we've been telling a story with the wrong characters
Mm,
and the wrong story arc. So, as much as we could pick out one thing here and there that's wrong, it probably is. It's more the story is companies make these decisions,
mm.
not governments. Your job doesn't go to China because some guy from China calls your boss and says, "Hey, I'd like this job and I'll do it cheap." And they're like, "Ah, fine. You make a good point." Like, that's not how labor moves around the world. A lot of these trade deficits are even inside law. They're even inside firms. International trade is largely done by private for-profit companies. Some countries have a bigger hand for the state than others, but yeah, we don't have a Chinese economy and an American economy. It's a delusion. It's a 19th century figment or an analytical shortcut, right? So sometimes when people try to understand something complicated, they break it into simple pieces. It helps
Yeah.
them analyze things. But you don't fall in love with your scale model, right? Because the bus is not 3 inches tall. You do have to remember that
Oh yeah.
it's a model, it's not the reality. Yeah. And so there isn't a Chinese economy, there isn't an American economy, there's a global economy, and the China has roles in it, some they like, some they don't, and America has roles in it, some we like, some we don't, and you can't just tear it down. You cannot just tear it down. And this is true left and right. Like, I remember in the depths of the passions and the upsets about police brutality, there are always some who say that we should just abolish the police. But
Mm,
those really don't work, right? Because even if you wanted to get to that end stage somewhere in decades, right? You don't get there by disrespecting the men and women who are police. And you don't get there by just getting rid of the police. And you don't, like, identifying social ills is real, it's valuable, but you can't just cancel stuff. You have to figure out how to work with it, and you have to figure out how to keep multiple perspectives kind of going and legitimate, right? So I think we should actually be disagreeing with each other a lot more than we have been, and just make a much better place for it. We need to get to the point where we understand that you don't grow and you don't even learn your own position unless you're willing to be confronted by people who radically agree. I think decorum matters. Decorum
yeah.
does matter.
Yes.
We have
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're standouts on that area of late, but it's up to anyone, to make those decisions themselves. But respect does matter. And the thing is, people don't respect each other unless they start respecting each other. I don't know that there's shortcut here. Some people find it through faith, and some people find it through civics, and a lot of people don't find it at all. But yeah, I think people should be free to disagree with each other a lot more, but
Mm,
maybe make sure to make it respectful. right? Like a place in the public square for a lot of different opinions, I think it's good. And it's been a strength of the US to some extent. So we have some history there to work with. But yeah, I think otherwise you're going to have a weird patchwork of abusive rules that weren't well thought out that don't apply to everybody. And that creates a lot of social anger and it creates a lot of inequity in the playing field. And those don't always redound to your benefit.
No, they don't. And I think and Americans are feeling it. They're filling up these AOC Bernie Sanders rallies. They're having to hold them outside.
Mhm.
Many people, they want the truth. I think they can handle the truth. And then, as Jeffrey Holder, the great Broadway dancer, designer, said, "What do you do for an encore?" So, America, what's next? What is
With
next?
some of these folks, that's a pretty scary question, but I like the idea. I think I'm struggling to make it to intermission on some of this stuff, but okay.
you
Yeah,
know, well, you know what? We're inundated with tariffs, tax talk
yeah. The tariffs are
first thing
just
in the morning.
taxes.
So,
Yeah.
well, just do me a favor. It The last 2 minutes are yours.
Okay.
Help us.
Yeah.
Help us. Yeah, I mean, do I come out of my
Yeah.
401k? I mean,
Not now. I mean,
do I blame these brown people who are being brought into the
always.
States?
I mean, do you have to ask?
Well, yes.
Always. Always. What I tell my students is when we do economics in the morning, we wake up and we recite the following: a black guy did it, a black guy did it, a black guy did it. And if there's an answer that you don't know, if the question confuses you, you just write that in and you'll always get at least partial credit. I don't tell them that, obviously, just for the record here. I realize I could be doing myself a disservice with that. Yeah. The point is, no one did it alone, whether it's good or bad. And the question becomes, how do we get here? And how do we work together to get somewhere else if we don't like where we are now? Right? Because blaming each other tends to be forestalling change
Mhm.
and shifting blame. And it usually means there's a messed up system of reward and punishment. Right. So, one of the most interesting things to me is like after all these years of studying addiction, a major issue for the United States right now, people began to ask an interesting question and their understanding shifted. So, we can do it. But they started saying, hey, is it that people will just die hitting the feed, the drugs, the feed bar in the cage? And then they figured out something pretty interesting. The cage is as important as the drugs. What's going on in the cage? And one of the sort of interesting things was the cage may be making the addict as much as the drugs, right? And so if you change life in the cage and you put toys in there and other rats, they won't die at the feed bar, actually. So I think we've been asking a lot of the wrong social questions. But it's hard work, but it's also potentially liberating because as long as you ask the wrong question and you're going to answer it with the wrong policies and the
Yeah.
wrong punishments. Right? So the big things I think is let's ask the bigger questions and let's move away from punishment and towards solution. Punishment is sadistic. It doesn't help much as a general rule. You have to have rules, you have to control people's behavior. There have to be punishments when they go wrong and they violate rules and hurt people and things like that. But everything isn't who's to blame. And in America, I think everything is who's to blame. And it starts with who doesn't agree with me, who doesn't look like me, who makes me uncomfortable. Right. And the truth is, you're as likely to get a solution from someone who makes you uncomfortable
Hmm.
as you are a problem. Right.
Oh
And
yeah.
learning how to see the world differently is actually sort of the thing that keeps your mind nimble, right? It's probably even better than Sudoku or the New York Times crossword puzzle, although those are both great, and I'm not indicting them, nor do I think they're the root of any of our problems. But I think you have to look to your fellow man and woman as the solution, not the problem, or you kind of go down a road that's hard to come back from. And I think it's fine not to be the biggest economy in the world. I always like to tell people who get into these weird, angry battles about does China have the biggest economy in the world or does the United States? Remember that they do have a billion more people.
Yeah.
So if they brought a couple more pizzas to their party, you can hate them for it, or you could say, well, they do have a billion extra guests at the party. Maybe they need a few more pizzas than I do. And I don't know if it's a crime against my soul. It might just be a bigger crowd.
Dr. Maxwell, thank you for taking me off
Thank you.
off of my off of my sanity. I'm not supposed to be laughing like this. He's one of the funniest
What's the
human beings.
alternative? It's not so great, right?
No, the
You'll have plenty
brilliant,
to not laugh about tomorrow in your news cycle, I assure you.
the brilliant Dr. Maxwell helping us, to really not be afraid of what's coming. Don't be afraid of what's here.
I'm not sure if the last hour wasn't my pitch for why I'm so interested in people forgiving each other, but in any case, even if it's autobiographically useful, I'll take it.
It's called growth. There you go.
Or a growth. It depends on how it works.
My beloved Maxwell, Dr.
Please
Maxwell.
wish your family and yourself the hopes and prayers for your health.
Oh, thank you. And, God bless you. Hope that you had a blessed Passover season. And as we're going into Easter this Sunday,
Yeah.
sending you so much love. Yeah.
Happy to everyone. Thanks to the listener. I know it was a rough run, but I applaud your selfless commitment and brutal sacrifice.
Oh, look, I applaud yours. Thank you for all the wonderful work that you do.
Thanks, guys. Be well. Happy holidays.
God bless you.
Bye
AM
bye.
950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.